Well, these are some of the attendees at the 8th annual Furry convention happening at the Edmonton Inn and Convention Centre. This year, there are about 900 of them, and they come from all over the world. Anthropomorphic animals have human characteristics. Some fans are inspired by classic cartoons like Bugs Bunny or Brian from Family Guy. Others simply enjoy the opportunity to act like someone else.
I think if someone was to ask me what furry is, the obvious answer is it's a furry con. A very Canadian themed furry con. And the one thing that we've always prided ourselves on is how different it is.
We're Canadian with a little twist. We try to do things a little differently, and we pride ourselves in that fact. We try to do our programming a little differently. We try to do our theming a little differently.
I've always felt that Furry is a very friendly convention.
When I look at the initial Furry and I look at it today, and I think to myself how we've grown so immensely.
The whole point of Furry is to be so completely different from your traditional furry con. And I think in that regard, we've actually succeeded quite well. Well, Thalanor is the name that most people know me as, or Thal. And my persona is generally a horse, usually Frisian, so like a bigger breed of horse.
And I'm Fallout. Everybody knows my persona as a coyote. It's fairly simplistic persona. It's more of a tune than anything else.
Fallout and I would have first met each other formally on the Alberta Furries forum, and that would have been in response to that original post I made about all the kind of the groundwork being laid for Furry. And some of the first responses were like, "Who the hell are you? Like, why do you think this is going to work? Like, who are you?" So Fallout was very positive throughout the entire ordeal, and he was actually one of the first that replied, and it just kind of went from there that he was interested in helping me, and the event just kind of went from there.
Like, I got so, hyped up from the convention culture. I really wanted to see some of that come back here, and then someone brought up your name as well as wanting to make that happen, and that was kind of, I think, where we kind of started back and forthing a bit, and coffees happened, and IHOP happened, and
it all kind of went downhill from there. I would say in the early years, most of our meetings all occurred at IHOP. It was where a lot of our brainstorming kind of kicked off, because we'd show up, it's like, oh yeah, we'll go for breakfast, and then so early afternoon before we're finally leaving. I'm surprised they didn't kick us out, but we spent a lot of time there.
Well, there was a little bit of a mix. We also sometimes went for a coffee at Waves or something.
Yeah.
So we would go for these one-on-one planning sessions, and then we would also go with a few other people to IHOP, and then brainstorm panel ideas and all this other stuff. And so it really all came together over food in one way or another.
All the people involved in the initial creation of Furry, it was a moderate-sized team, I would say. Obviously, Thalanor was the mastermind behind everything. Thalanor and Fallout Coyote. They worked extremely closely together for the first few years. Masqua, he calls himself just a bear now, but Masqua was a huge part of the team. He did so much for us. Sierra Rax, to this day, he's still with us, and he does more behind the scenes than anyone I've ever seen in my life. Dr. J was with us too. He was there from sun up to sundown, setting up equipment and doing whatever it took. Lastly, I can't forget Ray Vagan. He was also with us. He handled a lot of our lighting and audio equipment at the time.
In the early meetings for Furry, we didn't even know what the name was going to be. So there was some discussion of the name, what we would call it. We knew that it had to have puns in it. It was a requirement.
We wanted to put a very Canadian spin on it. That was going to be our thing. Every convention kind of seems to have their own little twist, and that was going to be ours. And it just kind of rolled off the tongue.
We're trying to figure out ways we could stylize the abbreviation of the name. None of that really ever panned out. Really early examples of like what we thought for the logo, none of which ever actually, became a thing. Part of it was just coming up with the name, general staff structure. So like what roles would be required, what ones would be optional, a lot of stuff like that. Also, where are we going to have this? How are we going to afford it? Most of the money came from me and Fallout. It was one of those things we knew early on that there's no way we'd be able to make it on first year reg unless you had, say, 500 attendees. There was no possible way we'd be able to pay for it based on registration alone.
Just logistically, we didn't have the size or scale of, say, the Greater Toronto Area or one of these American cities with 4 million people in a small area. A lot of how do we make sure that we can not only pull this off in the first year, but not financially ruin ourselves in a way that we can't pull this off next year if it is a success. So we had to be very careful about how we implemented the first year and making sure that we had a path forward.
I'd done smaller events prior, and so this was definitely a lot more of an ambitious undertaking, but I knew it was something that with help from a lot of the others that we could actually make it work. And so really it was kind of a way of giving back to the community in a way that I don't think I could have otherwise.
So I first heard of Furry, it actually was at Rainforest, and Thal was there, and we just happened to be chatting or ran into him kind of in the hall, and he was talking about planning out a convention that was going to be at West Edmonton Mall in the hotel originally, and it seemed really exciting. I didn't know if it was going to be possible, but he seemed to think that it was going to be possible. So that was, I think, the initial plan, and it was probably a couple years out. He said he was working on details and getting together funding and stuff like that. So, but it sounded like it was going to happen soon, and so it was pretty exciting.
And it got to such a degree. I remember being at Rainforest and actually being in my room and designing the very first ad for Furry, going to a Staples in Seattle to print out posters and then hand them out everywhere around RF. And it's funny because those posters all revolved around the event being at West Edmonton Mall, which in the end it never was. We're in Edmonton, Alberta, so who's really going to know where that is? So the first venue we looked at was the Fantasyland Hotel at West Edmonton Mall, because we thought everyone knows what West Edmonton Mall is. And so that was what we really focused on. We okay, we have to have it there. If this is going to amount to anything, we have to have it at somewhere, a place that's recognizable. And so that's what originally led us to West Edmonton Mall.
If you don't have the attendance to start off with, you need something recognizable. You need some sort of pull. Mm-hmm. And West Edmonton Mall, Fantasyland Hotel is gorgeous. There's so many attractions. Like, it would have been a dream come true if we could pull it off.
Yeah, we had meetings arranged very quickly. They were more than happy to have us. And oddly enough, they didn't really have an issue. The hotel did not have an issue with the furry aspect of things. The mall itself, on the other hand, was a little bit different. West Edmonton Mall for years had been known as a place that was, generally if you were going to fursuit, you could fursuit at the mall. In fact, you took pictures as for promo material with Beetlecat at Galaxyland and everything right at the mall, and we had no issues with that. Now, fast forward to about 2 or 3 months into this, when they now know that we're interested in having an event, security expressed a little bit of concern. We ended up doing kind of another photo shoot with a group of suitors, and we were escorted out of the mall.
So we did do a promo. We're going to try to do a promo shoot at the mall. And so we actually had a bunch of fursuiters, and some people even from Calgary came up, and a bunch of us went there. And at the time, the mall, actually, you could get away with suiting in the mall, but it was just kind of, I guess, on the edge of that. And so we all showed up there in suit. And they had called and talked to somebody at the mall management before that to sort of okay this, but I guess security didn't get the memo, and they didn't really like the idea of probably about 20 giant fuzzy animals showing up and wandering around the mall. So they basically asked us to leave, and we didn't get to actually do a promo photo shoot there. So that was unfortunate, but well, I mean, at least there was a few minutes of shooting kind of in the mall.
It took like this huge turn after, it was frustrating that if you just did it all casual and you wanted to first do them all, no big deal. But suddenly when you want to actually have something in place and do it formally, now suddenly you're no longer welcome. And so it went pretty, like that was kind of a showstopper for us, because if mall security isn't on board with it and you're restricted specifically to con space, that just wasn't going to work for us.
It's tough to use the mall as your selling point when you also have to say to the suitors who are so integral to your audience, no, you can't actually go and suit into the funnest part of the convention. I'm sorry about that. That's a tough one to explain.
That's when Trappa got involved to a certain extent, and Trappa has experience with a lot of cons. He's chaired several. He's staffed many. He knew that we were having some troubles with the venue, and so he has relatives out here. So he's like, "I'll visit. We'll go check out some venues," and that actually is what kind of got us back on course with where we ended up being, which was the Hilton Garden Inn. For Furry's first year, we ended up going with the Hilton Garden Inn in West Edmonton. They were one of the ones that we went to with Trappa. We'd been looking at them previously, and it was one of those ones that when we looked at it after, it was like, why aren't we going with this venue? They were the right size. The preliminary pricing that we got was kind of within what we were expecting, and the staff were incredibly open to what we were proposing. So for us, we kind of looked at that again, and Trappa was like, why aren't you going with this venue? We rented everything, which was, they had one, I say big, I mean, now compared to what we're used to, it was a rather small space. There was a kind of a boardroom, which ended up being dealers. And they had another one which we could subdivide. And depending on what was going on, we would either subdivide the room or we'd run it as one big open room.
It made the key events happen, and that's all we needed at the time. So
Mm-hmm.
I actually first met Thal at probably a corner on White Avenue in Edmonton. And we were actually throwing up posters. And in fact, I have. That was one of my first little duties, was to go around White Avenue, go around the university area, go around Grant MacEwan, and put these posters up all over the place so that we could actually spread the word out that, hey, Furry is here, come on out, check it out.
The initial problems that Furry faced was the same you would probably see with any small convention starting up. A lot of logistics problems, a lot of small vehicles, Toyota Priuses and stuff showing up crammed full of audio-video equipment, guys with borrowed pickup trucks trying to wheel equipment in through the hotel lobbies in a smaller hotel that really wasn't designed to host an event like what we did.
When we were setting up the night before, we didn't get started until really late, just because there was lots of things that went wrong with picking up equipment and whatnot. So we started really late. And it wasn't until about 6 a.m. that we finally got set up done. We went to the hotel, we're like, here's the keys. Went to the room, set the alarm for 30 minutes, slept for 30 minutes, then came back downstairs like, need those keys again. And so opened up all the rooms, and
the person at the front till gave us a weird look.
Yeah, I would have too. So, but yeah, there was not a lot of sleep that first night, or for most of the weekend, really. Mm-hmm. It's funny because you don't expect a lot of sleep when you're at a con or or staffing or volunteering at a con, but that kind of pushed it to a whole new limit. So 30 minutes is not good to to run off of.
My hope for the first Furry was that we wouldn't fall flat on our face. Because again, at the time, essentially beyond the board, there was just a handful of individuals really trying to pull this all together.
The night before, I was just sitting there and taking a break, and I was like, I was terrified because I wasn't sure what was going to happen, because I knew that, like, when we decided we were going to spend some of our own money on it, we kind of, go into it assuming that things are going to actually continue on to year 2, 3, 4, and on. But then I was starting to have this realization that if this really does completely just bomb, we're out everything and we're going to have nothing to show for it. It was not much. It was still more than I think either of us were expecting. I know setting up the night before, I was dreading how few people were actually going to show up. But I know the numbers were low, but higher than we were expecting.
Our reg definitely broke 200, but there was some people, we had some that could not make it in the end.
Mm-hmm.
And so that number was a bit in question.
Obviously, we were new. We didn't generate as much panel traffic as we probably would have liked. And I think this is where the birthplace of a lot of those really unique panels you see came from.
Paneling, we really wanted to experiment. We had a bunch of kooky ideas that we came up with over pancakes at IHOP. And this was kind of like the perfect opportunity for it.
Mm-hmm. So I ended up doing like a furry hygiene panel, which was complete just BS. It was not to be taken seriously. There was one person that went to that panel that I don't know if they assumed it was going to be a serious panel. So, like, to rewind a little bit, the furry hygiene panel was, I was doing this tongue-in-cheek thing of how to get furries to practice hygiene. So I ended up going to Toys R Us and buying all these plastic food toys, and I would hide like shampoo in it. I had an ice cream cone that when you twisted the bottom, deodorant would come out. And so I was like playing on this. This is how you get furries to practice hygiene, just disguise as food, and they'll use it. This one guy in the back, he goes, "This is bullshit." And then he just leaves. And I'm like, how did you expect this to be a serious panel? Like, look at the entire event. There's nothing serious about this. So I was like, okay, well, carrying on, and just kept on going. But yeah, so not everyone appreciated the furry hygiene panel. And then Drunken Fursuit Construction, I remember we did first year as well. I don't remember anything in that event because we made the mistake that first year of people bought us drinks. We actually had the hotel bring in the bar for that panel, and people would just buy us drinks. And it was bad because we'd only be like 20 minutes in and there's drinks lining up. And I see pictures from that event and I do not remember any of that after about 20 minutes.
There's a picture of me hitting a fursuiter with a toy mallet, and I don't remember any of it.
That was me getting hit with the mallet. Yeah.
Oh. Well then.
Honestly, as a young guy who has never been to a furry convention in his life, it was probably the party of the century. It was small, it was dirty, it was unorganized, it was a mess, and I loved every moment of it. It was also one of the first times where I finally got behind the turntables and started DJing for the convention. Shout out to Ray, by the way.
I also remember that first year too, when we were in where there was the dance comp, and it was so packed that everyone was out. Like there was maybe half the people were in the room. Everyone else was in the hallway having to like peer around the corner because the room was so small.
If you looked at the dance competition floor like space compared to what it is back then, it was it was like a shoe closet. Like the dancers literally could risk stepping on somebody just by taking 2 steps. It was hilarious, but it was so charming.
I don't know how we didn't die that weekend.
I know there were a few times during that weekend that I wished I had.
The first Furry had great reactions. I would say that the majority of people who attended were just overwhelmed. They were so glad that a furry convention could actually be happening right here in Edmonton, so close. the overall impression that most people had, that I seem to find, was that they liked it, they want more. When are you going to have your next one?
I think the initial reaction of the hotel honestly actually was quite positive. I even have in my collection still photographs of us with some of the hotel staff members taking pictures and whatnot. It was actually rather well received.
Throughout the weekend, we had a lot of good feedback, and that kind of keeps you going because, again, for those first couple days, you don't know what people are thinking. You're just kind of running the show and hoping that people are enjoying themselves, but you don't really know. You're so rushed that it's really hard to get that feedback.
I think that I call it the most negative but reasonably critical piece of feedback that we got was that it felt more like a large party than a convention. I think that's largely by virtue of we didn't have enough staff to keep things properly separated as much as we would have liked to. A lot of you were jumping on Reg, I was jumping on Reg. We made things happen, but it wasn't as well oiled as it could have been.
There definitely was room for improvement. I didn't have a lot of a baseline to go off of. I'd only been to probably 3 conventions prior. And it was really hard to compare because the conventions I had attended were rather large conventions, and then we were moving to something very small and pioneering something. So out of the gates, we knew there was a lot that really needed to be worked on. There was a lot of polishing. There was a lot of material and whatnot, equipment we bought that was very subpar, but we were working with a budget, and we slowly moved up from there.
Furry was introduced to me as a result of a friend of mine in the States, Naboa, who had suggested I go to a furry convention to find out more about what that's like. And he realized that there was one local to me, which, again, I didn't know this at the time. So he put me in contact with a friend of his, Vlen, and we decided we'll go together. Vlen had never been. He wasn't, again, really that connected with the local furry community, and we decided to go. So I found out about it probably in the early part of 2013, and booked our reg and went in May of 2013, and that was an interesting experience, to say the very least, being that it was my first con of this type ever. So, and still very new to the whole world of furry in general. So it was different. It was something else. That's for sure.
I would say coming into the second convention, the lessons learned from the first conventions were minimal. We made a lot of mistakes the first year, and we made a lot of mistakes the second year. It is definitely a learning experience, especially considering that pretty much everyone who was part of the team had never worked a convention before. There definitely was improvement, but the initial years were always a little shaky coming out.
My first impressions of my first furry were, admittedly, and I'm happy to tell the story because I'm going to be honest about it, was that I was really kind of disappointed. I guess in my mind, I had pictured something bigger and more elaborate. And because of the limitations of that hotel and the actual number of attendees going to this thing, it was a fairly small space. I remember thinking, I walked in the front lobby, and I remember walking down a hallway to a T where there was 2 ballrooms, very small ballrooms. And the other way was the zoo, they called it, like basically where people hung out and stuff. And that was it. And you could traverse the entire con space in about 35 seconds, right? So I guess in my mind, it was kind of like lacking something. It seemed almost like, really, like people go to these things, right? Because this was my first experience at this, and having gone to big shows like CES in Vegas and the Haunters thing and those kinds of things, it kind of made me wonder, like, was this even for real? Like, was this serious, right? I understand now that there are limitations. There were limitations from a budgetary perspective, personnel perspective, all these things. So I look back on it and think, maybe my standards or my expectations were too high. And don't forget, Later that year, I went to MFF, which is the exact opposite, right? Biggest event, so many people, and but yet, you know what? There's a reason I got involved with Furry. Some of it was accidental, but there's a reason I got involved with Furry because I could see the potential for what it could be versus what I saw when I went there that first year. I also remember at the Hilton Garden Inn that the fursuit games were played outside in the side parking lot of the building with cars going by. So it was not a great hotel set up for that.
People had a taste of that first con in Edmonton, and they wanted more. Especially those, again, who had been to Furry as their first con. It was sort of that first dip into the furry community at a convention, and it just sparked an interest, and they wanted more, and they wanted more.
That's been one of the fun discoveries throughout the process, has been with the hotels. Most of them, when we ask them, how do we compare against, say, other events? They're like, weddings, especially, and kids' sports teams, way harder to deal with. Demanding, make a mess, they don't clean up after themselves. Furries are tame by comparison. The getting occasional person getting sick is kind of about as bad as it gets.
Mm-hmm. I found generally, talking to various hotels, that even the most poorly planned furry events are still better planned than most, weddings and things like that. Speaking with the Hilton Garden Inn after, they had mentioned, it was probably about a week after, we were doing a kind of a post-mortem on the event, going over last minute bills with the hotel. And as fate would have it, the Oilers farm team was in town, and that was the hotel that they were staying at. And they said, yeah, like, we pale in comparison to what goes on with some of these events and some of these groups that show up. So that made me feel a lot better about what we were doing. I did yoink our piece of paper off when we were done at the Hilton. Now, what was funny is before this was taken down, they had the current event for the weekend at the Hilton, and it was Furry. But they also had a section for what was, events that were coming next week. And the very next event after Furry was a disaster cleanup service, which I thought perfectly fit with, what would follow after a Furry con. I should have taken a picture of that because I found that so amusing.
We were at the point where we were starting to really start to grow, and with more of the people requesting more events, more dealers to come in, we knew we had to get bigger space.
So we started canvassing a lot of other hotels in the city. And I think that over several months, there's not a single hotel that has conference space that we did not go to. There'd be dozens and dozens and dozens of hotels that we would go and check out. And of that, then only a small number actually kind of looked like they would fit our needs. So we ended up, for our third year, reaching out to the Sawridge.
The Sawridge was nicer from a visual perspective. It had a much more kind of natural look, lots of wood and dark. It was darker inside, and it was kind of lodgy feel. But my impression of that hotel was that it was very dark. And because all the meeting space was in the basement, the ceilings were very, very low. And so you never got the impression of it being a grand space. So even the main ballroom, it felt low. And I wasn't a big fan of that, but it was certainly bigger and had more room, and the rooms were nice, and the facility was nice.
At the very beginning, it sounded great. The prices looked good, comparable with other hotels in the area that they were either smaller or not as nice. We're like, okay, this looks perfect. So the amount of room we had there was insane. In fact, I think there were a couple of rooms at the very, very end that we didn't even use for that year that we were there. So we were just excited because now we've got all this space that we can work with.
There was, because most of the convention space was underground, we had to do something very awkward for the parade, which was we had to utilize the elevators as part of the parade. So we actually managed, I think, to pull it off quite well. We basically staged 5 or 6 people coming out at a time from the main ballroom, and we had people who would help them get on the elevator, bring them up to the first floor, parade through. There was nice scenic looking areas where people were set up to take photographs and stuff, and then take the elevator right back down. And it was an awkward system, but we made it work, I think, fairly well.
Yeah, the Saw Ridge was a bit smaller, and just it had a very strange layout of one of the ballrooms where there was kind of a rail and almost like a pit area. So that's where we ended up having fursuit games in there. So it was almost like an arena or something. I don't know, but it was certainly interesting.
The first warning bell should have been the fact that the dance area was immediately underneath guest rooms. The first night, the dance started up, and I remember going to bed, and I was on the 4th floor above the dance floor. I remember going to bed, and all I heard was I'm like, oh, this is probably not going to end well.
So I'm mixing, and I'm doing a really, really heavy mix. Like, my mix is, like, you know my mixes. It's big room house, lots of bass, lots of heavy drops, a lot of, like, party kind of music, stuff that would piss off your ornery old neighbor if you were playing it outside in the backyard. Anyway, what happened is we ended up turning the system up maybe a little bit too loud, and there were people going up and nudging us, going like, hey, like, turn it down, come on, like, turn it down, you're gonna get us in trouble. And I'm kind of sitting there and I'm like, okay, I'll turn it down. But then what people will do is they would come up and be like, hey, why'd you turn it down, turn it up. So I turn it up just kind of like gradually.
We had assurances from the hotel. We've had plenty of weddings with loud music in there. There will be no problems whatsoever. Well, unknown to us, and we thought we had pretty much the whole hotel booked, but they had a reoccurring agreement with, I think it was either a soccer or a lacrosse team, where basically they rented out like 50 or 60 rooms, and they always got the exact same side of the hotel, and that side of the hotel happened to be directly above the dance floor. And the soundproofing was not what we were led to believe.
So what turns out is that there was a volleyball team upstairs, right above, like, the bar area in the convention center. And it turned out that the bass was so crazy that it was vibrating the metal under the mini fridge on the room above them. And that's the reason why people were complaining.
So then, not only did this cause a fuss for these people, but they got so upset about it, they skipped the hotel, they skipped us, they went directly to calling the police to make this noise complaint.
In the corner of my eye, I see cops coming out from the corner of my eye. I'm like, oh, great. Here we go. I'm going out in cuffs because I got into, like, a noise complaint, and I'm getting a big ticket. So I'm seeing the cops come up to us. They come up to me, put their hand on my shoulder, and they go, you're going to have to turn it down about 25%, and you're going to have to leave it there. And I kind of looked at him, and I went, okay, cool.
The year I missed Furry, I was working in Africa, of all places, and I do distinctly remember I was out on the helideck, and I turned my phone on just to see if any text messages had come in, and one actually had come in within the last hour, and it was a panicked message for all staff members to report in immediately.
The police officers that came to the hotel were totally chill. They hung out. They took pictures, some with fursuit heads on. So they really did not feel that the complaint was worthy of, calling them.
We had a lot of people like, oh, the cops showed up. It's finally a real furry con. So, like, well, I don't know if that's the measure I would use, but hey, whatever.
Really, it worked out all in the end. But at the time, sure, there was a danger, I suppose, of the con having to shut down and maybe not being able to continue for the rest of the weekend.
We met with the hotel after the event, and it wasn't anything like, malicious or, mean or anything. It was just, you're probably better looking at another venue. And they even gave us a couple of recommendations for other hotels to look at. We never went with any of them. They just didn't quite meet our needs, but they at least tried to help.
And just for the size that we were at, I think that was probably the best that it could have worked out, because we were at an awkward point of hotel spaces in Edmonton where there was not really anything at our size, at our price level, with rules that we could reasonably expect furries to follow.
It was one of those things where right when we start to think that maybe we're getting our head above the water financially, then suddenly we're right back to where we started, because the next jump is again this huge increase in price. So you're right back to square one in terms of our budget.
The initial hotel obviously couldn't accommodate us anymore. We'd had some bad luck with our second hotel, and we needed to find a venue that could accommodate.
Was I sad to see us leave there? No, not really. I think we could have done better, and I think we have.
The third hotel that Furry used and still uses today was at the time the Ramada Inn by the old municipal airport. They've changed names. They've been rebranded since then to the Edmonton Inn, but we've been there for quite some time now. I believe at least 4 years.
My first impression of the Ramada was shabby. There was duct tape all over the carpets in the main lobby. The rooms had CRT televisions in most of them. It was not great, but it offered us some good space, which we needed because we had grown to a point where we needed a place where we can grow with. It offered us reasonable pricing, and it offered the fact that the hotel was willing to work with us. They didn't sometimes when you go to a hotel and you tell them what you want to do, they have to be polite. But what they do is they give you a quote that's so high, you're not going to go for it. It's one of those go away quotes, right? The Ramada did not do that. The staff there, they were actually really good to work with. And even though it was difficult to make ends meet the first couple of years that we were there, the first 3 years actually that we were there, now, because the hotel recognized what we were capable of, things are good.
Their management team has been fantastic to work with. Their hotel catering team is phenomenal. Shout out to Chef James.
They actually came to us and said, hey, what if we create a specific type of hot dog for 3 or 4 different lines of anthropomorphic type animals? And people can pick and choose whichever animal version hot dog they want, and we can see what ends up being the best at the end.
They took it upon themselves to do the dog bowls, the slushy drinks that everyone enjoys at the con. That was, again, their catering team came up with all of that. I know I'm guilty of partaking in those too.
I started helping out with Furry here and there right away, but like as a volunteer, the year that we had the Western theme.
It's actually pretty funny too, because I was looking at some of our programming here. Soviet Contraband Smut Factory. that was one of the ones that Kat did.
Oh yeah.
So, really, that is kind of summarizes things quite well, with our programming being a little bizarre.
I've run a couple panels actually. When I was a vendor, I promise this is relevant, I was a fortune teller. So I read tarot cards and palms because a college friend of mine told me furries know how to pay artists, and they do. They absolutely do. And so I got asked to do a panel on reading tarot, which was a blast. I had a wonderful time. I've also been asked to do panels on writing and editing because I've worked as a science fiction and fantasy editor in the past. And sometimes I would do comedy panels. Friend and I did Mad Libs a couple years running with the crowd and some drinks. Some drinks, never mind.
We have this great area in the middle of the hotel, right in the middle, called the Arbor Lounge. And there used to be actually water, like a river that ran around it, but they've taken that out. But there's this sort of a rocky thing with trees all around it, and it's actually a really neat space. And there's like a bar right there, which they keep open late for us during Furry. And people of all types, people that don't know each other, are happily congregating and sitting with each other and hanging out in that space. And it's fantastic. It's actually one of the highlights of Furry. So I know that a lot of cons, they're room party cons, or they're very cliquey in some way. I like to think Furry isn't that. Furry is very welcoming and open to people, and I hope that that people will come check it out, because I don't think you get that experience everywhere. And even if we grow, not even, but when we grow, as we grow, I think that that vibe will still be there, because at the heart of what we do is provide a great venue and great entertainment that allows people to connect with each other. One of the things that I was a big fan of conceptually anyway, was theming. Like, I always felt that theming was a weak point of the furries that I've been up to that point, in the sense that, yeah, I kind of saw some cheap store-bought, decoration that they slapped up, and that was kind of theming. And again, I know that it was budget and manpower to actually be able to do those things, but without spending a ton of money, I knew I could do more. And I think that was sort of my direct route into how I could help Furry better. And, it culminated in how we're doing conventions today. There was a point where, when I started getting more involved in Furry, I was asking some direct questions and on my Twitter. And I know that not everybody in staff liked the questions I was asking. I was asking my own personal Twitter, and I was asking questions like, does a con even need a theme? Does a con even need a GOH? And I remember getting a message from Thalanor saying, I know what you're doing. And I said, what? I'm just asking these questions because I think it's important for us to get a sense of whether or not what we're doing is necessary.
Every con had a theme, and I think initially we knew it was something we were going to move towards. We just, with our first initial year, the theme was very much just Furry.
Hockey cards were our first year. So yeah, we went with hockey cards the first year, even though there was no real theme. It was just like, well, crap, how do we do something that's Canadian, even though we don't have a theme per se? So it was like, let's just make hockey cards for us and a couple other people. We had like made up stats on the back for, your standard, like goals, assists, mullets, things like that. And then just fake bios on the back. But we did have an entire set of these, and we actually made that nice framed set that we gave to the Hilton on our first year.
The thing about the Canadian themes to start off with is that we didn't have to do a whole lot of it because Canada is the theme.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of worked well with the whole, we're a very small shop, very understaffed. We're just doing what we can. And then you compare that to something like Harry Otter, which was very, very different and very thematic. And that took a lot more to pull off. Mm-hmm. But, something like that was not possible in, the first 3-4 years.
So for the second year, going with the Great Canadian Road Trip, it was one of those things that I think we discussed, that like almost anyone that kind of lives in Canada has kind of this recollection of at least one road trip, because nothing's a short drive in Canada. So we thought, let's do something where we can kind of, have some fun with various provinces and whatnot. And it kind of also expanded upon that whole thing going back, where the whole point of Furry is to kind of have that really kind of Canadian kind of theme to it throughout everything. So same thing, everyone would just kind of commission an artist, and then we would do postcards. A lot of them are just, kind of artwork, just lots of different random designs. There's Dr. J, and then we got Tiggs, of course. And then I had to do my Saskatchewan, easy to draw, hard to spell. So the theme after that was your idea, and it was the Pirates of the River Saskatchewan.
That's a mix, though. I think that my idea was Pirates, but I think you took the River Saskatchewan song. There's a song
yeah,
for it, and you made it. You put the Canadian twist on it. So
yeah, so it kind of again goes back to, you know, like this Canadian aspect that kind of
Yeah.
rolls throughout everything.
As a Canadian kind of song, it works. It really, really worked, but we didn't push any envelope on it, unfortunately. It was like we had like a little bit of theme pieces, we had a little bit of stuff to work around with, but it didn't immerse me. It didn't make me feel like I was running through the fields of Saskatchewan stealing people's diesel trucks and tractors. Like that would have been fun to get going. Like you could have even done like a sci-fi spin to that where like the entire thing is like the entire world has been leveled by a nuke and it's just Saskatchewan. And then you could do like some kind of weird cyberpunk stuff that like you could do like the Pirates of North Saskatchewan, right?
With Weird and Wild West, I mean, it's still to a certain degree had that kind of, you know, country western kind of slant, which still kind of tied in with the Canadian aspect a little bit, especially given our location here. But it was a pretty significant departure from some of the other themes we had done in previous years. Is also a very good example of where selecting the GOH really heavily comes down to the theme as well, because having Stripe as our GOH that year worked perfect, because that's exactly what their art style kind of leans towards, is that kind of, you know, that steampunk kind of look. So it worked really well. I think this was for the Wild Weird West where we ended up doing the tiny little cards with their wanted posters. And we always had this thing where we wanted to kind of have a game where you could kind of collect them all. And there's fallouts. This is where I said, like, apparently we do have names for our mascots. Apparently I forgot about that. So
I'm not sure if they're official names though, or
We
if
might
we
have just
made them
made-
parodies of like
Well,
famous outlaws.
yeah, we would have had to for a couple of them, because like Billy the Kid is
Yeah.
obviously not going to be the actual name that we go with.
A couple years at Furry, starting with Weird Wild West, I was in charge of the poker tournaments because I worked as a poker dealer at the time. And I just had this sudden flashback to going to the vendor hall to look for prizes and finding those cute, the cute Nekomimi and having those for a grand prize. And I remember sitting there at this convention just being like, here I am, doing my normal job, except I'm surrounded by people wearing ears. This is great. This is way better.
As time goes on, who killed the concher I actually wish was actually a real thing, because there's some days where I really question what I'm doing. So.
Our Who Killed the Concher theme, yes, that was really one of our attempts, I guess, at starting to get a lot more of the theming into the con.
We knew for a while we kind of wanted to do this kind of murder mystery kind of theme. We just had to kind of come up with a way to implement it. I think it probably is notorious for having the worst murder scene ever, or the worst death scene ever. So I remember how badly I had to fake that one.
We had set up a couple props and such where you would actually sort of see him die. And I know there's a couple photos, maybe videos out there of him lying dead on the floor and another board member just hacking away at him.
If I remember right, it was kind of a clue thing. Like in your package, you would get some cards that you could kind of compare notes with your friends and see who wasn't on the list and who was a viable suspect. I'm just desperately trying to remember who actually did it in the end.
So who killed the concher? That's a good question. I mean, there has always been some speculation that it was another member of the board who was looking to take over and bump off Thal, but nobody was ever conclusively proven to be the killer.
I think that was where we were starting to get into the whole bit where we have these really big ideas for themes, but that's where we really starting to feel that pinch of we don't have the resources to actually pull off what we'd like to do. Because our going into planning for that, we had, you know, a lot of neat like theatrical elements that we wanted to incorporate with it. We had discussed having random encounters throughout the weekend where you would have pieces of the storyline kind of just play out in con space throughout the weekend, and it would all kind of tie in with this kind of figure out who did it. And in the end, it just turned out that we didn't have the manpower to do it. We didn't have the money or resources to do it. And so we kind of had to strip it down quite a bit. And that's where we first started to hit our head on that ceiling in terms of resources and not being able to do what we wanted to do. And things kind of changed a little bit after that with how we did our theming.
When we were looking at themes for 2017, one of the key things was, how were we going to do something grander and bigger? It was my first attempt at trying to steer us towards something that was more themable, right? And I personally do enjoy the Harry Potter series and sort of the universe that it's created. And without ripping it off, I thought we could parody it. I'm actually a big fan of parody, right? And so we could take all those cool things about what makes the Harry Potter universe interesting and fun, and how could we do it so that people could live in that world just for a few days?
Well, with the Harry Otter theme, just within the fandom itself, there just seems to be this huge fan base for the Harry Potter franchise. So we knew we'd be, starting there. You'd be starting with a good thing, and then it just kind of went from there. By that point, our attendance was high enough that we were able to afford to do a lot of the theming we wish we could have done in the past.
And even if you're not a Harry Potter fan, if you didn't come, you weren't one of the kids that read the books, I certainly wasn't per se, but if you were, you could understand it. But even if you weren't, you could understand what was going on. It was that kind of universe. It was general enough, but specific enough at the same time. And I think that my concepts for wanting to play that out and make it immersive was because of my love for what Disney does, what Universal Studio does. When you go to a theme park, you are immersed in a lot of things that they do, and that's what I wanted to bring to the event for Harry Otter.
I think the reason the Harry Otter theme was so well received was, a big part of it actually was our staff, our team. We had the sorting collar. We had a team dedicated to building the dealer's den to try and make it look like Diagon Alley. Honestly, one of the biggest contributing factors was actually BC Breakaway. He pioneered almost everything to do with that.
He has visions that kind of like Disney, and he thinks it's going to be like a Disneyland or something with all these great things.
I had gone through the effort of doing a presentation on it to sort of talk about why this was a good theme, right? And what we could do with it. And I think that helped in getting it chosen as the theme.
He's a big fan of Harry Potter, so I figured, I've not watched any of the movies at all, so you're probably better at doing this than me.
The general response to my concepts for the Harry Otter theme from the rest of the board were very supportive. The question really was, can we do it? Can we actually pull it off? I had a long list of things that we wanted to do. And you know what? We actually did do most of them, to the extent of building Dogsmead Village as the dealer's den.
And then at the same time with Harry Potter, there's the houses, and there's always kind of a competition between the houses. So that was worked into this con as well.
We were battling between the various houses at different events, such as, let's say, the dance competition. We'd have people shouting out for their own house anytime one of the dancers came on.
Throughout the whole con, kind of cheer for their house, and it really brought a whole different aspect to the con that I haven't really seen it in any other con before that.
The four houses were Cinderclaw, Bourbonbeak, Rundlehoof, and Hisserin. I was part of Cinderclaw.
What was the Slytherin equivalent?
Hisserin?
Hisserin, yes, I was Hisserin.
I was a Hisserin. I was definitely House Hisserin.
Oh, yeah. For that year, I was House Rundlehoof?
I was in Rundlehoof House.
Rundlehoof.
I believe Rundlehoof House won that year too. I'm pretty sure because there was some drama about Slytherin House cheating.
There was this game where the various houses could gain points by doing various things throughout the weekend. So obviously, if a house had more members, it would kind of tilt things in their favor. So what we did is we would throw out random houses. So when you got your reg, you were house whatever, unless you were a higher tier reg, and you could pick your house.
Somehow there was a mix-up in reg, and more Slytherin got handed out.
We had a certain person in registration, for example, who was stacking the deck, so to speak, so that most of the incoming registrations were suddenly going toward the Hisserin group.
And they were actually taking more Hisserin cards from the reg system and handing them out. So there were a lot more Hisserin attendees out there than any other house.
You'll see somebody maybe change the numbers on that one feed board that was there for a little while, or you'll have 3 loaded Hisserin judges in a competition.
It was because they cheated that they ended up losing, because much like the actual movie, where in the movie there was a house that got penalized 50 points for some breaking some rule or something like that. We docked Hisserin 50 points for cheating. And as a result, they lost and became last place, while Rundlehoof ended up winning.
It was close, though. I think they were close second.
Yeah, I think in the end it was the Rundlehoof House that won that year, and it was a lot of fun. Everybody really had a good time with that, I think.
Mind you, here's the thing. Rundlehoof was going to win anyway, whether we had deducted the 50 points or not. Hisserin would have finished second, but then they ended up finishing last. But it wasn't something we had planned. It just happened organically, and it was hilarious. It was so on brand for Hisserin to do what they did, and for the result of how we dealt with it at the end was just like one of the movies.
The theming for all the future cons after the Harry Otter, we really tried to take what I'll call the magical solution we found for that one theme and try to bring it forward to all the other future cons.
What I don't want to do is I don't necessarily want to repeat ourselves. The very next year, everybody loved the concept of being sorted into houses and how the houses competed against each other. And, that in itself was a fantastic part of what we did in that year. But the very next year, people were saying, oh, yeah, for Paz Vegas, you really got to do that again. You got to do some way of finding a way to do houses with each other or something. Someone suggested that you can make them rival hotels, casinos. Some people suggested that they're mobsters, different mob groups and stuff. At the end of the day, I said, you know what? It doesn't make sense. We're forcing this story, this narrative of having these competing houses in a storyline or in a theme that doesn't require that, right? And so I never wanted to just say, well, it worked, so let's just do it again. It had to make sense from a theming perspective. So if people are wondering why we haven't really done that, we kind of did a little bit with the Universal Studios theme, but generally speaking, we've avoided doing this sort of sorting of people per se, just because it didn't really make sense to do it in any other context.
So far as my favorite, everyone loved Harry Otter, myself included. Universal Studios was a lot of fun though too. We had our first wedding at Universal. I'm trying to remember what year we decided to do the first outdoor parade, where we actually had all the vehicles and whatnot come into play. I definitely remember that year because I remember Bearpaw and Fallon in the back of the convertible. So yeah, I'd probably say that Universal might have been one of my personal favorites.
Viva Paz Vegas to me comes in a fairly close second, along with Universal Studios. For me, my biggest, I guess, memory of Universal was slightly, I guess, not quite the theme itself, but the incorporation of the wedding that we actually had at Universal. It was put together as a red carpet event. So we had the paparazzi out there snapping all the pictures. We had the wedding party coming in along the red carpet with the velvet ropes on the side. We had everyone parading up to the stage. And of course, we had the actual wedding, Bear Paw and Fallon themselves. So to me, that was a great memory and a great way to incorporate that into the Universal theme.
My personal belief is that we run an entertainment enterprise. We want our guests to be entertained. We want them to feel that they are part of something. And what better way to do that than to make them a part of the story? And in order to do that, I needed to immerse them in places like the dealer's den. I needed to immerse them in even the registration process, everything from our publications. It had to all be specific to that theme. And so there was some questions like, can we really do this? Is this something that we can or should do? And you know what? It did cost us money. But at the same time, I think it really set the standard for what was to come afterwards and what will come even further after that, because we can't go back to doing boring stuff anymore.
You know, as we were discussing, it's not many years ago that Furry actually started to break even. And so with COVID, attendance has been one of those concerns that what are we going to see next year? You know, I don't think it's going to be that bad, but in the back of my mind, it's what if we get to the point that our registration drops to the point that we are now in the red again?
Will Furry still be around 10 years from now? God, I hope so, because I really need somewhere to go and no one else accepts me.
You know, I'd like to think that it will continue to grow and maybe we'll become 1,500 people, maybe even 2,000. Unlikely, probably closer to 1,100, 1,200, 1,300, that kind of range. I'd like to think that we have a good group of people running it and continuing to live up to the standards that we built for ourselves to date, and that they remember that at the end of the day, what we do is for our guests, our attendees. And as long as they remember that, then I think Furry will be fine even 10 years from now.
I would love to see Furry grow to a certain point, but I would not like to see it grow beyond the point where it becomes this big, massive, let's say, 5,000 participant or more type of convention that needs multiple hotels to travel back and forth in between.
I don't know necessarily if Furry would, or anyone would want Furry to be that large. There's no reason why it can't be a bit of a smaller con. As I said, it's a different experience, and it's not a bad thing to not be the largest con in the world, right? So I think if you're a good size, that you have enough people, that it's still plenty of people contributing, lots of fun, lots of people to meet and see, but yet still you're able to talk to all your friends and meet all your friends and spend plenty of time with them, because it's not just crazy busy full of people or waiting in lines, huge lines to get into events, right? So definitely you want a good balance of size of con there, I would say.
As we've discussed over many years, there's kind of that cap, like that invisible cap where you kind of want it to end, because once you get to around 1,500 thereabouts, events kind of just take on this different like flavor, and they just, I don't know, there's something to be said about smaller cons where you can see almost everyone you want to there. You're not lost in a crowd. You're not overwhelmed by it. And that's kind of where I want to see Furry, is where it's a comfortable convention that, you know, people enjoy going to.
Furry, to me, is the perfect con for anyone just starting to get in and getting a taste of what conventions are in the furry world.
I want us to be self-sustaining. I want us to feel like we have enough staff where we can achieve the things we want to achieve. But I want to hear, when I go to another convention or when I hear people talking online, I want to hear people say that we're the convention that consistently knocks it out of the park, like with Harry Otter. I want us to do that and do that consistently, and I want that to be like our defining thing.
Yeah. From a positive standpoint, not like, oh my god, I cannot believe how badly they screwed that up year after year after year. No con does it quite like.
I look back at my years so far with Furry with a lot of fond memories. I think that it's something that is a labor of love for a lot of us. We have one of the smallest staffs of any furry convention that I know of, and while we're always trying to get more people to be involved, I think that it's because we have this small group where everybody's willing to do so much to make this convention go that it makes it special. And I think people see that we care about what we're doing. And I hope that people will continue to come and support us, support furry conventions in general. There's nothing like an in-person experience, and I know COVID kind of made that difficult for a couple of years, but we're back, and I hope everybody will be too.
I got nothing to worry about when you're by my side. I got nothing to worry about when you're by my side. I looked out and I saw the rain. I wanted it to go away. I felt the weight of it all come down. I braced from the deafening sound, but you were there, holding my hand. You were there, holding my hand. I got nothing to worry about when you're by my side. I got nothing to worry about when you're by my side. You were there, holding my hand. You were there, holding my hand. Holding